The courtroom was completely silent. So silent that even the sound of pages turning in the file on the judge's desk felt unusually loud. That man was standing straight. His suit was expensive, his posture confident, but there was a strange stiffness on his face, as if he had already made up his mind. And then he said that sentence, "Your Honor, I want a divorce." A faint murmur spread across the courtroom. Lawyers glanced at each other. The judge lifted his eyes and for the first time looked at the woman sitting quietly. There were no tears on her face, no screaming, no chaos, no breakdown, just a deep breath. And perhaps that was the most dangerous thing of all. The judge asked, "Reason?" Without hesitation, the man replied, "She hides things from me. She has no ambition. She doesn't contribute anything meaningful." Those words echoed inside the courtroom. No ambition, no contribution. When people usually ask for a divorce, they show anger. Here there was no anger, only arrogance. The woman said nothing. She simply looked at her lawyer, then at the judge, and from this moment this stopped being just a divorce case. From here, it became a story of power, misunderstanding, and a hidden truth. The judge asked for the record. "Madam, would you like to say something?" The woman stood up. She straightened her coat, and then, in a very calm voice, she said, "Your Honor, I only want to say one thing. My husband never once asked me what I actually do." Silence again filled the courtroom. This wasn't a dramatic movie line. It was a simple truth, buried for a very long time. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "And what do you do, madam?" The woman opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, and right there, the story took a pause. So much was hidden inside that pause. That pause carried the years. When she left the house every morning saying, "I'll be late," that pause carried the nights. When she closed her laptop and went to sleep without making a sound, that pause carried the meetings, where some of the most powerful people in the world sat across from her. Yet no one at home knew. The man smiled slightly and said, "Your Honor, she just does small things, hobby-type stuff. Hobby." The judge took a deep breath and closed the file. "Madam, please answer." The woman looked straight into the judge's eyes, and then what she said changed the entire atmosphere of the courtroom. But not yet, because the real power of this story is not just in that answer. The real story is this. Why did that man never hear this answer before? And this woman, despite everything, why did she stay so silent? This story is not limited to a courtroom. This is the story of every relationship where understanding stops and ego starts speaking. If you're interested in stories like these, where court decisions aren't just legal but deeply human, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. What's coming next won't just be a twist, it will be a reality you may have never seen from this angle before. And yes, if you've already subscribed, thank you, truly, honestly. This support gives me the motivation to keep bringing you more powerful courtroom stories like this. Now, the next question isn't why the divorce was filed. The real question is, when the truth finally came out, who actually won in that courtroom? The truth is, courtroom stories don't begin in court. They begin years earlier, inside homes that look normal from the outside, inside marriages where silence slowly replaces conversation. Before that courtroom day, before the word divorce was ever spoken, their life looked fine. At least, that's what everyone thought. They met like most people do, nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. He was ambitious, confident, the kind of man who always knew what he wanted. She was quieter, observant, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. In the beginning, that balance worked. He talked, she understood, and for a long time that was enough. But somewhere along the way, understanding turned into assumption. He assumed she was supporting him. She assumed he trusted her. Neither of them ever said it out loud. When she started working longer hours, he didn't ask why. When she stopped sharing details, he didn't notice. Or maybe he noticed, but didn't care enough to ask. Every morning she left early. Every night she came back late. Laptop bag always with her. phone always on silent. To him, it looked like distance. To her, it was focus. She wasn't hiding. She was building. But here's the thing about silent builders. If no one sees the work, they assume nothing is happening. At dinners with friends, when careers were discussed, he spoke for both of them. She's figuring things out. She's not really career-oriented. She likes simple things. She smiled, not because it was true, but because correcting him felt unnecessary. At family gatherings, people asked him about his plans, his goals, his future. No one asked her, and slowly, without realizing it, she stopped offering answers. Not out of fear, not out of insecurity, out of exhaustion, because explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who you are is the loneliest kind of effort. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she worked, not casually, not part-time, strategically. Contracts, calls, decisions that move numbers most people never see. But she never brought it home, because at home there was no space for it. Whenever she tried, the response was always the same. That's nice. Sounds complicated. Is that even stable? So she stopped trying. And here's where things broke, not loudly, not suddenly, quietly. He started feeling superior, not intentionally, but subtly. He believed he was carrying the relationship, financially, direction-wise, emotionally. And when that belief settles in, respect quietly walks out. Arguments started appearing, not about big things, small ones. Why are you always tired? Why are you never home? Why do you never talk anymore? And the most dangerous question of all, what exactly do you even do all day? She heard that question many times. Each time it landed heavier, but she still didn't answer, because deep down she believed results speak louder than words. She thought, when the time is right, he'll see it. She thought, when it matters, he'll ask properly. She was wrong, because some people don't ask, because they already think they know. And when the distance became unbearable, he didn't look inward, he looked for an exit. By the time the divorce papers were filed, he had convinced himself of a story, that he was leaving someone who had no direction, no ambition, no contribution. That belief made him confident, comfortable, even proud. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that the silence he misunderstood wasn't emptiness. It was preparation, and that courtroom, the place he believed would confirm his control, was about to do the exact opposite. Because in the next section, the question won't be, "Wah, gee, she does." The question will be, what happens when the truth is finally spoken, on record, with no place left to hide? The judge waited, not impatiently, not sternly, just waiting. That kind of silence in a courtroom isn't empty, it's heavy. It forces the truth to either come out or collapse under its own weight. The woman took a breath, not the shaky kind, the steady kind. Then she spoke. "Your Honor, I am the CEO of a holding company." The man shifted slightly, barely noticeable. But it was there. The judge looked up again, this time fully. "A holding company?" He repeated. "Yes," she said. "I oversee multiple subsidiaries, technology, logistics, and financial services." The courtroom didn't react immediately. People usually expect gasps, whispers, shock, but real shock doesn't sound like anything. It freezes. The man let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, more confused. "Your Honor," he said, "this is exaggerated." The judge raised a hand. "Let her finish." The woman nodded. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself emotionally. She did something far more powerful. She stated facts. In the last 5 years, the company expanded into 12 countries. We employ over 9,000 people. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. She continued, "Last year, our valuation crossed several $billion. That word landed differently. Billion." The man turned his head toward her. For the first time that day, he actually looked to her. Not as a spouse, not as an assumption, as a stranger. That's impossible, he said. You never, she cut him off. Still calmly, you never asked. The judge leaned forward. Do you have documentation to support this? She turned to her lawyer. A folder was placed on the desk. Not thick, not dramatic, organized. Financial statements, board records, legal filings. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. The sound of paper this time felt louder than before. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Then the judge looked up. These documents appear legitimate. The man's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we were not aware. That, the judge said calmly, is becoming very clear. The man sat down, harder than before. His face wasn't angry now. It was unsettled, because anger can be controlled. Shock cannot. He tried to speak again. She could have told me. The woman turned toward him, for the first time, and she said, I tried. You dismissed it every time. No accusation, no bitterness. Just a sentence. The judge closed the file. Let me be clear, he said. This court does not measure contribution, based on who speaks louder at dinner. A few people nodded unconsciously. The judge continued. Marriage is not a hierarchy, it is a partnership. The man stared at the floor, not in shame, in disbelief, because everything he thought he knew about the last decade had just collapsed, quietly. The woman returned to her seat. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate, because this wasn't a victory. It was a correction. And corrections don't feel good. They feel necessary. The judge scheduled the next proceedings, asset disclosures, legal separation terms, but the case had already shifted, not legally, psychologically. The courtroom knew it, the lawyers knew it, and the man, he knew it most of all, because the story he walked in with, the one where he was leaving someone less than, no longer existed. It had been replaced by a truth he was never prepared to face. And in the next section, we'll see what happens when power dynamics flip. Not through revenge, but through reality. What does a divorce look like when the person you underestimated turns out to be the one holding everything together? Truth doesn't explode. It settles, and when it does, everything in the room rearranges itself around it. The courtroom didn't erupt. No one whispered. No one reacted out loud. But the energy changed. You could feel it. The judge sat differently now, straighter, more attentive. The lawyers adjusted their posture. Pens paused mid-sentence. And the man, he hadn't moved since sitting down. His shoulders, once relaxed, now slightly hunched, not from fear, from recalculation. Because when power dynamics flip, the first thing people do is re-evaluate where they stand. The judge spoke again. Given the new information, he said, this court will require a complete financial reassessment. The man's lawyer leaned in quickly, whispered something to him. The man nodded, but his nod wasn't confident anymore. It was automatic, like someone following instructions, while their mind is somewhere else. The woman sat still, hands folded, eyes forward, no satisfaction, no pride, because she didn't come here to prove anything. She came here to end something, and endings don't need applause. The judge turned toward her. Madam, he said, why was this information not disclosed earlier in the marriage? The room waited. She didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she chose the right one, because I didn't want power to define our relationship. A pause. She continued, I wanted respect to come first. That sentence did more damage than any number ever could, because money can be debated. Respect cannot. The man swallowed. For the first time, his voice was quieter. You made me look foolish, he said. She turned toward him slowly, not defensive, not angry, just honest. No, she replied. You did that yourself. The moment you stopped listening. The judge let the silence sit. This wasn't a legal moment anymore. It was human. The man looked around the courtroom, not at the judge, not at the lawyers, at the people, strangers, people who now saw him differently than he saw himself. And that realization stung, because losing control privately hurts, but losing it publicly, that reshapes you. The judge cleared his throat. This court advises both parties to proceed with mediation. He paused. And I strongly recommend that assumptions not replace communication in future relationships. That wasn't part of the ruling, it was a lesson. The woman nodded. The man didn't, not because he disagreed, because he was still catching up. As the session adjourned temporarily, people stood. Chairs moved. Footsteps echoed. The woman remained seated for a moment longer, not to savor the moment, but to breathe. Outside the courtroom, this story would sound like revenge, like poetic justice. But inside, it felt different. It felt heavy, because sometimes being right doesn't feel like winning. It feels like realizing how long you were unseen. And in the next section, we'll see what happens after the courtroom, when legal truth turns into personal consequences, because court decisions end marriages, but they don't end emotions. Courtrooms have doors for a reason, because once you walk out of them, there's no judge, no audience, no structure, just reality. The woman walked out first, not because she was rushing, but because she didn't need to stay. Her lawyer spoke quietly beside her, explaining timelines, next steps, procedures. She nodded, absorbed it all. This wasn't new to her. Decision-making was part of her daily life. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, but not relieving. She didn't feel free. She felt finished. Behind her, the man stepped out slowly. Phone in. Hand. Messages piling up. Missed calls from people who suddenly mattered. He didn't answer them, because for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. At home, silence waited. Not the calm kind, the unfamiliar kind. He sat down on the couch and looked around. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The photos on the wall, trips they took, smiles they shared, felt staged now, like a version of a life that only existed from one angle. He replayed the moment in court. Several $1 billion. The words didn't anger him. They haunted him, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Years of not asking, not listening, not noticing. He realized something uncomfortable. He didn't lose her because she hid things. He lost her because he didn't care to look. Meanwhile, across the city, the woman sat alone in her apartment. Laptop closed, phone face down. For once, she wasn't working. She stood by the window and watched the city move. Cars, lights, people rushing somewhere, life going on. She thought about the marriage, not the ending, the middle, the moments when she could have spoken louder, pushed harder, demanded to be seen. And then she stopped herself. Because self-blame is seductive. It makes you feel responsible for other people's blindness. She wasn't invisible. She had been ignored. There's a difference. Her phone buzzed. A message from a board member. Another meeting request. Another decision. Waiting. She typed back. Tomorrow. For the first time, she allowed herself a pause. Not because she was weak, but because she no longer had to prove strength. Back in his apartment, the man opened a drawer. Inside were old notes, plans, goals he once had, all written with certainty. He stared at them and realized something painful. Confidence without curiosity turns into arrogance, and arrogance eventually stands alone. He didn't miss her success. He missed the version of himself who thought he knew everything. That realization hurt more than the divorce ever could. That night, neither of them slept well, not from regret, from awareness, because once the truth shows up, you can't go back to not knowing it. And in the next section, we'll see how the world reacts when private truths become public narratives. Because some stories don't end in court, they continue. In reputation, perception, and legacy. Court cases don't stay in court. Not anymore. By the next morning, the story had moved, quietly at first, a mention here, a question there. People didn't talk about the divorce. They talked about the reveal. She was the CEO. No one knew. How did he not know? Questions spread faster than answers. In professional circles, her name already carried weight, but now it carried curiosity. Not because of her success, that was already established. Because of her silence. People admired ambition. They respected power. But restraint, that unsettled them. Colleagues replayed old conversations in their heads, the times she listened more than she spoke, the moments she deflected praise, the way she never corrected assumptions. They saw it differently now, not as humility, as control. Meanwhile, the man faced a different reality. At work, conversations felt shorter, politer, less certain. People didn't confront him. They didn't need to. The unspoken shift was enough, because public perception doesn't need evidence. It feeds on narrative, and the narrative had changed. He was no longer the confident partner, supporting a struggling spouse. He was the man who underestimated the person closest to him. That label sticks, not because it's fair, but because it's simple. Friends reached out, some cautiously, some awkwardly. "You okay? Rough situation." He answered politely, but he could feel it. The subtle distance, respect once questioned, doesn't return easily. Across town, the woman was invited into rooms she'd already been influencing from the shadows, panels, interviews, features, not because she asked, because people love stories of reversal, but she declined most of them. Not out of fear, out of clarity. She understood something now. Visibility changes things, and not all change is progress. She didn't want to be known, as the woman whose husband didn't know. She wanted to be known for what she built, quietly, on her terms. Still, the story lived on. Online forums speculated. Company. Ment sections argued. Some praised her restraint. Others questioned her secrecy. Everyone had an opinion. Very few had understanding. Because from the outside, stories are entertainment. From the inside, they're consequences. The man read one article late at night. He didn't finish it, not because it was harsh, because it was accurate. That's what hurt. Truth doesn't need drama. It only needs recognition. And recognition, once lost, changes how you move through the world. In the next section, we'll see how both of them adjust to this new reality. Not as partners, not as opponents, but as individuals forced to redefine themselves. Because after reputation settles, the hardest work begins. Living with what remains. Change doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with speeches or dramatic realizations. Most of the time, it shows up in small adjustments. For him, it started with listening, not the polite kind, the uncomfortable kind. At meetings, he spoke less. Not because he had nothing to say, because he realized how much he had missed by always speaking first. He began asking questions, real ones, not to control conversations, but to understand them. It felt strange at first, like learning a language too late. Some people noticed, others didn't. But for the first time, he wasn't performing confidence. He was rebuilding it, slowly. At home, the silence remained, but it no longer felt hostile. It felt instructional. He cleaned wit. Out-rushing, cooked without distractions, sat with thoughts he used to drown out with noise. He didn't romanticize the past anymore. He studied it, and what he found wasn't cruelty. It was neglect, masked as certainty. For her, transformation looked different. She didn't change how she worked. She changed how she rested. She stopped apologizing for boundaries, stopped explaining decisions to people who hadn't earned explanations. When she spoke now, she spoke clearly, not louder, clearer. She didn't correct assumptions immediately, but she no longer carried them silently. In meetings, she took up space without shrinking it for others, not aggressively, naturally. She didn't need to prove competence anymore. That chapter was over. At night, she journaled, not about work, about identity, who she became while staying quiet, who she might have been if she had spoken sooner. But she didn't dwell, because dwelling keeps you anchored to versions of yourself that no longer exist. Occasionally their paths crossed. Logistics, formalities, necessary conversations. Nothing emotional. And yet something had shifted. There was no resentment left, just distance, the honest kind. They saw each other clearly now, and clarity doesn't always bring reconciliation. Sometimes it brings closure. Neither of them won. Neither of them lost. They evolved, and evolution rarely looks like victory. It looks like understanding. In the next and final section, we'll see why this story matters beyond them. Because some lessons aren't about divorce, or money, or power. They're about what happens when we stop assuming and start seeing. Every story leaves something behind. Not facts, not headlines, a question. And this one asks something simple, but uncomfortable. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Not what we assume, not what we project, what we actually ask. This wasn't a story about divorce, or money, or success hidden in silence. It was a story about attention, about what happens when listening is replaced by certainty. The man didn't fail because he was cruel. He failed because he stopped being curious. And curiosity is the quiet glue that holds relationships together. Without it, confidence hardens into arrogance. Support turns into dismissal. Love becomes a role, not a practice. The woman didn't succeed because she stayed quiet. She succeeded despite it. Silence protected her work, but it cost her visibility where it mattered most. That doesn't make her weak. It makes her human, because many people believe they'll be seen eventually if they just wait long enough. But waiting is not communication, and understanding is never automatic. The courtroom didn't end their marriage. It exposed the gap that had existed for years, a gap filled with assumptions. This story resonates because it happens everywhere, in homes, in friendships, in workplaces. Whenever someone decides they already know the answer and stops asking the question, the real lesson isn't, don't underestimate people. It's deeper than that. It's this: never confuse silence with absence, never confuse calm with emptiness, and never assume contribution only looks one way. Some people build quietly, some people love quietly, some people carry entire worlds without announcing them. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, then it did its job. And if you've stayed till the end, thank you, truly. That kind of attention is rare. It's what motivates stories like this to exist. More stories will come, different cases, different lives, but the question will remain the same. Are we really listening, or are we just waiting to be right? Because sometimes the most powerful truth is the one we never bothered to ask for.